In this lesson, we'll focus on the primary color correction. I will show you how you can adjust the exposure and the balance and also customize your scopes. So here on the timeline, I've got 3 clips from the previous lesson: the Vlog clip, the ARRI clip, and the Sony S-Log free clip. And my color management settings are exactly the same as in the previous lesson as well. So let's start from adjusting the exposure of the first clip. And in order to help ourselves, we'll use the waveform, as the waveform scope depicts the brightness of your image as well as specific colors using 10-bit video scale from 0 to 1023. And it basically depicts our image from left to right. Also, when we click here on the settings, we can customize our waveform if we want to. So we can, for example, deselect colorize to turn off red, green, and blue channels. So now we can only see the luminosity. Then we can turn on the extents that show the lightest and the darkest parts of the image. Then we can change the intensity of the waveform and the graticule. So you can just adjust it to your liking. We can also show the reference levels, our 0 and 1023 levels. And then if we want to, we can change their position manually. But let's reset the view and let's move on to adjusting the exposure. So as I have mentioned, when we use the waveform, we should make sure that we keep our luminance levels within the right range, which means that we shouldn't really push it lower than 0 and higher than 1023. This is a general rule, but the exact spread of the waveform also depends on the image and the look we want to achieve. And in this case, I can see that my clip is definitely on the brighter side. And I can push my midtones and shadows down to make it look more balanced. So let's label the node as exposure, and I will start with my lift in the primary wheels, and lift represents the shadows. So using the master wheel below, I will push it to the left and look what happens with the waveform. Look how it is moving down, and also look at the rising contrast in our clip. Now I will move to my gain, which is responsible for the highlights, and I will push it down just a touch as well, like this. And this is before and after. A huge difference. Then I always like to use the contrast and the pivot controls to add even more depth to my clips. So the contrast control adds or takes out the contrast, and the pivot control adjusts the contrast tonal range. So once contrast is set, we can use the pivot control to refine the tonal center of the tonality, brightening or darkening the clip while retaining contrast. And maybe it sounds complicated, but basically what I always do is I just play around with my contrast and pivot controls until I'm satisfied with the result. So let's increase the contrast first, and then let's adjust the pivot like this. And this is how my clip looks. It could also be a bit brighter, as when we look at the waveform, we can see that we could push the highlights a bit up and it still would be within the right range. But let's not forget that color grading is very subjective, and I like to keep everything a bit darker. And also I can tweak it further down the line. Remember that now we are only covering the basics. Now let's move to the ARRI clip. And here the color balance is also a bit off, but let's start from adjusting the exposure. So I'll label my first node. And now let's just change the waveform to parade. And the parade splits your image into RGB values, red, green, and blue. And what it does, it measures the saturation of each of these colors in your image. So in this case, we can clearly see that the blue is dominant here, and we'll be fixing it later when we move to the balance. But we can also use the parade to adjust the exposure, as it also shows us the same 10-bit 0 to 1023 range as the waveform. And my preferred way to adjust the exposure is by using primary wheels, but we can also do it by using the curves. And here we have our white curve, we can use it to adjust the contrast and the exposure. And by clicking on this Ungang button, we are able to separate all of our color channels and work on them separately. But for the exposure, we'll use only the white curve. So let's not change anything here. And the upper point of the curve is responsible for the brightest parts of the clip, and we can use it like this to lighten or darken the clip in the lightest parts. And the bottom point of the curve is responsible for the darkest parts of the clip. But usually, what we do with the white curve is that we create a characteristic S shape. So let's grab the curve in the upper part like this. And let's push it up quite a lot as this clip is quite dark. And then let's grab it in the bottom part. And let's push the shadows down just a touch like this. And then what we can do, we can enable over here editable splines, and this will give us a possibility to smoothen out our curve. As you can see, now we have two handles coming out of our point, so I will just use them to brighten my clip like this. And now we have created maybe not a perfect S shape, but something close to it. It really depends on the clip we are working on. And then I would also still go to my primaries and I would play around with the contrast and the pivot to shape the clip a bit more. Like this. Okay, now I will leave it to you so you can play around with adjusting the exposure on your own. And now let's move to balance. And we'll start from the same clip as it looks very blue. And we can also read it very clearly from the parade, as the blue trace is way more prominent than the red or green. So let's hit Option S to create a new node, and let's call it balance. And one of the ways of balancing the shot would be to use the auto balance tool from here. And in order to make this tool work, we have to find in the shot something that's supposed to be white. So in case of this clip, this will be very easy as we have a lot of snow here. Then let me grab the tool and let's just select the snow, and voila. The shot is technically balanced, as when we look at the parade, the color channels are exactly on the same level, and this is before and after. But I can also see that the shot is way too warm now, as this is an auto tool, so it obviously doesn't work perfectly. It cannot see the nuances, it's automatic. And here we have a lot of snow in this shot, so obviously there should be more cooler than warmer tones in this shot. But it's not a problem, as we can always tweak this result using the temperature and tint sliders over here. I will just push my temp towards blue first, and then my tint towards magenta, relying on my visual judgment. And this is before and after. And now let's reset our balance node by right-clicking on it and selecting Reset Node Grade. And we could also adjust the balance manually using the temp and tint sliders, looking at the clip and monitoring the parade, like this. As now when we look at the parade, it's even. But now let's move on to another quite difficult clip to balance, as this time this Sony clip is extremely warm, and we can also see it looking at our parade, as this red channel is very prominent. But this time I want to show you how to balance the shot using another scope in Resolve, the vector scope. The vector scope is incredibly handy for measuring the degree of hue and saturation in the image. The further the markings are from the center, the more saturated your image and colors are. And also we have here the skin indicator that I'll be covering in another lesson of this course. And also you've probably noticed that the vector scope represents the color wheel. So here we have magenta, then blue, then cyan, then green, then yellow, and then red. So by looking at the trace, we can judge where the clip's hue and the saturation lays. And in this case, we have the trace move towards red and yellow. So it's a sign for us that we have to move it towards the middle in order to balance the shot. So I'll label my first serial node and I will call it balance. And I will use my offset wheel to balance this shot, as the offset affects the whole clip uniformly. So it affects the shadows, midtones, and the highlights uniformly. So let's grab the center point here in the color wheel and let's start moving it towards blue and cyan, which is the opposite to red and yellow. And as you can see, our trace is also moving. And I will be looking at the talent stop, as it should be white. So I will be moving my offset accordingly. Something like this. And now look at our trace. It's perfectly in the middle. That indicates that the clip has been balanced. And this is before and after. And I really hope you'll have fun with practicing it on your own. In this lesson, I will show you how to use noise reduction in DaVinci Resolve. You can use the noise reduction if you have an access to the studio version of DaVinci Resolve. And I will show you how it works on the Sony S-Look free clip, as it happens sometimes that what we've shot is actually very noisy, and with DaVinci Resolve this problem is actually very easy to fix. And my color management settings are the same as usual, and here I have only performed a basic primary correction. This is before and after. And now, what's important to remember is that when we decide to perform the noise reduction, it should always be on the first note before any other adjustments, as this is how the tool works best. And let me zoom in so you can actually see how much noise this clip has. I hope you can see the amount of the dancing noise over here. So let's zoom out and let's right click on our node, and then let's select add node, and let's add serial before, as this way we'll be able to add a new node before current. Now I will label it as noise reduction, and I will zoom in again to be able to see how my noise reduction tool works. Now I will go to my effects and I will search for the noise reduction. And then I will simply drop it onto my node. And then here we get an access to our temporal noise reduction. And to be honest with you, I never mess around too much with these settings. I only change the type here from faster to better. And then we have here our chroma and luma threshold. So what I do is I just drag these two sliders to the right as much as I need to. Normally I only go up to 20 here. It's usually enough, but this clip is quite noisy. So let's try around 67. And this is before and after. A huge difference. And also remember that the noise reduction may slow down your computer quite a lot. So what you could do is you could perform it at the very end, right before exporting your footage. It's just a little tip from me. In this lesson, I will teach you about different types of nodes in DaVinci Resolve, and we will be using these Blackmagic Raw clips. This is the first clip, and this is the second clip. And these are my project management settings. You can copy them. And here the input color space doesn't matter, as these clips are raw, so DaVinci Resolve is able to recognize them automatically. And I am working in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. So let's move to the first clip. And the first type of node in Resolve is a serial node. And serial node is the most basic form of node. The shortcut for it is Alt-S or Option-S. And serial nodes work as your basic building blocks for correcting footage and creating looks. And if you are a very beginner, you can actually work using only serial nodes. I always use serial nodes for my primary color correction. So this is where I am adjusting the balance and the exposure. And I have created 3 serial nodes here. So my first one will be my exposure. The second one will be my balance. And the third one will be my contrast. I can also adjust my contrasts separately. So let's start from the exposure. And I will also adjust my waveform here. I will make it more visible. And if you prefer using the white curve, feel free to do it, but I will move to my primary wheels, and here I will increase my gain first. Then I can see that my shadows are pushed down quite a lot, so I will maybe raise them a tiny bit. And then I will decrease my midtones a touch. And this is before and after. Just a tiny adjustment. Then let's move to balance, and I will also change my waveform to the parade, so I can see all of my RGB channels separately. And I can tell that the clip is quite warm as the red channel dominates here. So I'll use my offset wheel and I will push it a bit towards blue to neutralize my clip, like this. Just a touch, it doesn't need much. And this is before and after. So now the clip looks more neutral, and we can move to the contrast node. And here I will play around with my contrast and my pivot sliders to add more depth to the clip. And this is before and after. Now, another thing is that we can apply nodes on the clip, but also on the timeline level. So here I have my clip selected, which means that when I create a node in this node graph over here, the corrections I make on this node will apply only to the clip I'm currently working on. But sometimes we want to apply the same corrections to all clips on our timeline, and in this case we can apply the node to the whole timeline. So let's switch the clip here to the timeline. We can also do it by switching between these two dots over here. And my node graph is empty, so I will hit Option S to create a new serial node. So I will quickly make some adjustments here just to show you how it works. I will shift the offset, adding a lot of pink hue to it. And now when I move to my other clip, I can see that the same change has been applied here as well. But let's get rid of this node. I will not be using timeline nodes today. I just wanted to show you that this is possible. This way you can, for example, add a vignette to the whole timeline. But now let's move to our first clip, and also let's move to another type of node, which is a parallel node. And we create parallel nodes by hitting Option P. So I will hit Option S first to create a serial node, and then Option P to create a parallel mixer. And parallel nodes are designed for secondary color grading. We can create as many parallel nodes as we need. And in simple terms, parallel nodes are connected with a parallel mixer, and they branch out from the same source, creating identical substreams where you can perform independent adjustments. And what's important, they are all equal. So the order of the adjustments doesn't matter. Now, let's move to some practice. So I will use my parallel nodes to adjust some parts of the clips separately. And I don't need that many parallel nodes, so I will just remove most of them, leaving only two. And let's use these ones to create a look. So I can see that the green hue is very dominant in my shot. So I can manipulate it a bit, and then I will also manipulate the red hue as well. So let's label our parallel nodes as red and green. And let's click on the red node first. And here, in order to isolate red, we could use our qualifier over here by selecting the red hue. And then by using these sliders over here, we could refine the selection. But there's also another way of doing this. So we can also use one of the Resolve's automatic presets. So we can go here to Color, and then Presets. And then here we can choose from 6-vector green, yellow, red, magenta, blue, cyan, or chroma light or dark, depending what we want to select. So let me grab 6-vector red. And now when we turn the highlight mode on here, we can see our selection. And this is an auto tool, so it usually needs some additional adjustments. But it's a very good start. And maybe this is even a faster way of selecting a certain hue than the qualifier. So let me adjust it a bit better. I will only move my hue slider a bit to select more of the red hue. And then I will turn the highlight mode off. And now I will, for example, go to my curves. And look what's happening when I move my curve up and down. Only the selected hue is affected. So I will brighten it a tiny bit. And then I will go back to the primaries. And I will push my gamma towards yellow to introduce some warmth. Like this. And this is before and after. Now let's move to the parallel node labeled as green. And here I will also grab the preset. So this time it will be 6 vector green. And let's turn the highlight mode on. And this time our selection is not that accurate, only that little bit has been selected. So we have to improve it a bit more than previously. So again, I will stretch out my hue slider to grab more of that green hue. I can also play with the softness over here. And now the selection looks way better. So again, I will go to my primaries. And here I can push my gamma wheel towards different directions to get different results. So when I introduce here more yellow, my clips look a bit autumnal. And when I push it towards blue, I'm getting this very cold look. This is before and after. And when I disable all of my parallel nodes, before and after, I can see how much I was able to change the character of my clip only by using parallels and 2 different presets. Now let's move to another type of node, which is a layer node. And we create layer nodes by hitting Option L. So I will hit Option S first to get a serial node, and then Option L to get a layer mixer. So this way, here I have 2 layer nodes, and I will also move them down here. And the difference between the layer mixer and the parallel mixer is that when we use the layer mixer, the node below always takes a priority over the node above. That's why we often use layer nodes to isolate skin tones when we want to create different looks. And this is what I'm going to show you. So I will label my nodes. My node below will be my skin tones, and my node above will be my look. And just to show you how the layer nodes exactly work, let's click on the look node and let's push the offset here towards blue quite a lot. And we can't see any change here yet. And this is because first we have to make a selection on the node below. So when I disable my node below, I can see all the changes I've made. But let's reset it and let's do a proper adjustment using our layer nodes. So first I will click on my skin tones and I will go to my qualifier this time, and then I will select the skin on the clip. Then I will turn my highlight mode on, and now I can see that I have to improve this selection quite a lot. So I will play around with my sliders. Sometimes it takes a little while. Okay, now I will only blur my selection a lot. And I will denoise it. This will work. I have selected not only skin tones, but the wooden item and other elements as well, but they will also benefit from doing this. So let's turn the highlight mode off and let's move to the look node. And here I want to increase that cold look we have just started creating. So I will introduce some of the blue into the shadows using my lift. And maybe in the midtones as well. And this is before and after. And now let's have a look at what would have happened if we haven't isolated the skin tones. So I will disable this node. You see, the skin tones and reds wouldn't look as nice and vibrant as the look would have affected them too much. Okay, now let's move on to our next clip. And here I want to show you one more type of note that's called an outside note. And as you have probably noticed, every note has got not only the green output, but also the blue output, which is the alpha. So we can pass the alpha information like this. So to show you how it works, let's grab a round power window and let's stretch it so it covers almost the whole clip. I will leave only the corners and I will soften my power window. Then I will turn my highlight mode on here and I will make some adjustments inside the power window. So let's go to the white curve over here, and using my white curve, I will just raise my highlights a bit, and then I will decrease the shadows to get some nice contrast. And this is before and after. And now let's right click on our node and let's go to add node, and here, this way we can add another serial node. Then we can pick an option to add a serial node before. Then we can add parallel or layer nodes, but we can also add the outside node over here. So let's select it. And this way we have passed the alpha information from one node to another. And also this alpha information has been inverted. So just to show you, let's turn the highlight mode on over here. And this is exactly the same mask we have created before. The only difference is that it's inverted. So on this outside node, we can also make some changes to the outer part of the power window. So I will turn the highlight mode off. And here I will simply push my white curve down in the midtones to create a vignette. I hope you have learned quite a lot in this lesson.